All right, welcome back to our discussion of Trent Horn's arguments that he presented at an event at Emory that I'm going to tell you I had a real hard time following it due to the lack of visuals, the lack of things written down. I just can't do it. So here I am talking through things with paper in front of me, with the arguments in front of me, and I hope being able to see these things and engage with them will be helpful for you. So in the last video, we talked about the humanity argument. Now we're on the personhood argument. And this is all available off the Google Doc if you want to get this and do whatever with it. All right, so this argument says abortion's usually wrong. And why is that? Well, because abortion directly kills an innocent person. And killing innocent persons is usually wrong, so it would follow that abortion is usually wrong. Well, of course, the big question here is like, well, what's a person? And I discussed this in my presentation. We are persons, rocks aren't persons, plants aren't persons. What makes us persons? What would end your personhood? How could you continue to exist as a person given various changes for you? And yeah, so that's the big question. And Trent agrees that this is the big question. And I want to comment that he claims, he basically proposes we should work from sort of clear cases. And on his list of clear cases, I thought was interesting that he had rats and pigeons. And I thought, really, like rats and birds are like rocks and plants. Aren't there some potentially relevant differences between rats and pigeons on the one hand and rocks and plants, such that perhaps those animals are persons or person-like? I mean, if you know about this, sort of some of the top philosophers and legal scholars argue that some animals are persons or are person-like. So I thought kind of just dismissing that without much argument, without much engagement was not so awesome. So it's kind of comparable to this. So I believe that Trent thinks that embryos are persons and, with the right to life. And some people would respond to that, that's ridiculous. Embryos are persons? Oh, come on, give me a break. They can't be persons. And I'm sure sort of anti-abortion people are familiar with that sort of response, and they would notice that as well. You're just assuming that my view is incorrect. And they'll probably often say, like, you're assuming that because you just don't want it to be true. Well, I wonder if that sort of happens here. So my only real comment is, a lot of people argue that, well, some animals seem to be person-like. If you think about, like, are rats and pigeons more like us, or are they more like rocks and plants? And a lot of people are going to say, like, well, in the kind of morally relevant ways, they're more like us. They're sentient, they're conscious, they have feelings. And then, of course, as I mentioned, there are people who have rats and pigeons as like pets and stuff like that. And you, of course, know that people have dogs and cats as pets. And people know that dogs and cats have personalities. And people perceive dogs to be their friends, man's best friends. And rats and pigeons are in some ways very much like those animals. So I thought this was basically kind of dismissing something for sort of no particularly good reason. In fact, kind of bad reasons. So that's kind of why I noticed it. I'll also sort of observe that, rats and pigeons are, of course, life. They are conscious life, sentient life. So there's this phrase pro-life. But, of course, if you were sort of pro-life but fond of advocating sort of killing rats in these sorts of ways, you might think like, well, pro-life isn't really a great way to describe your view. So that's what I think. I think the view is better called anti-abortion, simply because there's all sorts of life that people who think abortion's wrong don't sort of advocate for. So we saw that in this event. All right, anyway, so Trent agrees that we should sort of make a list of definite persons, definite non-persons, and then sort of see, well, what sort of theory of personhood, what explanation kind of makes the most sense. And he considers the one that persons are sentient beings. And his objection is that, well, if that were true, then some animals would be persons. And again, I think this is just question begging, kind of a horse laugh response, as it's called, sort of dismissing with prejudice a huge body of research. So you can, head to Amazon, head to a bookstore. There's books about animals as persons by legal scholars, dolphins as persons by philosophers, elephants, apes as persons by lawyer philosophers. So there's a lot of stuff here, and I think it shouldn't be dismissed sort of in the manner it was at this event. So if I'm wrong, I mean, engage this and sort of explain why, what's the problem here. So he doesn't like the answer sentient beings because he says that would imply that some animals would be persons. Another theory is like, well, to be a person is to be an actually rational being. You got to be able to do calculus and make TikTok videos and stuff. And the objection there would be, well, that would mean babies aren't persons. So he proposes that persons are individual members of a rational kind with the innate capacity for certain functional abilities. So rational capacities. If you are sort of the kind or group, in this case, the species that is characterized by some as having a rational capacity, this innate capacity for reason, then you are a person. That's what makes you a person. So let me just observe that there are other options here. So John Locke proposed persons are conscious, intelligent beings capable of rationality and reflection, including self-reflection. And I think the sort of sentient being proposal builds on that, but takes off the sort of self-reflection requirement. You just to be a person, you have to be conscious, but not self-conscious. That would sort of be a common view. Tom Reagan, of course, had a view that could be interpreted as like persons are subjects of lives. To be a person is basically to be like a sentient being with sort of psychological connections over time. It's sort of like the same being over time. So this is a little more than sort of merely being a sentient being, if you're picky about it. But to be a subject of a life, to be an experiencing subject of a life, you don't have to have the ability to self-reflect. So, Reagan argued that babies seem to be subjects of lives. They're, of course, sentient beings, etc. All right, so Trent thinks this is the best answer, and I don't think it's the best answer, and I think a lot of people wouldn't really find it to be the best. Why is that? Well, if you think about the various questions about like what makes you a person, why are you a person? I think what makes you a person and the rocks and plants aren't persons. Like, what's the difference? What would end your personhood? How could your personhood end? Could you exist in an afterlife, etc.? Could there be divine persons? Could there be spiritual persons? Could there be, in a galaxy far, far away, beings that are persons? I think sort of the simplest, most obvious, most explanatory sort of answer is going to appeal to sort of like your psychological capacities. Persons are basically conscious feeling beings that are aware of the world, have a perspective, things can go better or worse for them. They exist over time, that sort of thing. And what I mean by exist over time, it's like there's this sort of like the mythical like 2-second memory goldfish. And, that like is swimming around a bowl and like every moment is just like a new moment. It's like, wow, wow, wow. Well, I think perhaps personhood requires a little more than being just a merely sentient being. But these are controversial issues. So, but the basic idea is that persons are these sort of conscious feeling beings. And this is a common view out there. Goes back to Locke, Descartes, Parfit. Lots of folks think something like this. Marianne Warren. And I think if you ask around, you'll find people giving answers that are similar to this. All right, so next, if you think about personifying something, like in like a cartoon, they sort of personify some brooms. What are they doing? Well, they're giving those brooms like a mind, feelings, etc. I think that seems to be the obvious answer. They're not, making them individuals of a rational kind. That's kind of a convoluted answer, I think. Of course, there's the question of sort of human beings who are in human organisms. We talked about human beings, but definitely human organisms that are in permanent vegetative states, brain dead, etc. Trying to turn this off. They seem to be of the kind, individual member of a rational kind. but clearly they have lost something. And many people would interpret what they've lost as their personhood. I mean, you know, this terrible thing happened to somebody, but their body's still alive. Why is somebody upset? Well, because the person is gone. And, of course, since the person is gone, it might come to the point where, well, we should think we should let their body die, or maybe if need be, we should actively kill their body. And as I argued in some other videos, you know, if they're a person, it would seem like that would be wrong. So I think Trent sort of wants to say, like, well, if this happens, they're still a person. They're just now a person that would sort of be okay to let die. And a person that, yeah, at least he would say that. And I guess I would say, like, well, if you're a person that is now okay to let die in these sorts of ways, that just means, like, you're no longer a person. So I'm not sure why you're calling that individual who has lost everything that seems to make them a person. Why do you want to keep calling them a person? There are other reasons why we would want to be, like, respectful to sort of dead bodies, brain dead bodies, etc. There are other ways to do this other than thinking they're persons. All right, finally, or maybe not finally, I don't know. I think this explanation is pretty darn abstract. Like, I don't really sort of understand how it works. So there's something about, like, rationality is at the core of being a person, but you don't have to be rational. It's fair to wonder, like, well, why is rationality sort of so important on this theory about personhood? What's so great about being a rational being? But the idea is, like, well, if you're a group, if you're a member of a group, even if that group, and that group could be like the species where some of the members are rational and get various characteristics from being rational, like they get sort of like basic rights because they're rational, then like everybody of the group who gets those characteristics, those having rights, because they're a member of a group where some of the members are rational, and remember, the actually rational folks get this, but the other folks, even though they're of the same group, they get that too. I guess I'm just going to say that I don't really understand how this is supposed to work, and people have developed various sort of counterexamples where you kind of tweak the groups and go in all sorts of ways. But this is just very abstract, and a great explanation for how it works would be great. So another thought here is this theory of personhood seems to propose that severely cognitively disabled persons are persons, not kind of because of what they are, like in their own right, but like because they're of the same species as rational beings. And you might think that's kind of weird. You know, they're persons because of how they are. And yes, how they're related to other beings of the same species is something about how they are. But you might think it seems like it should be like more about them in and of themselves. So anyway, it's all very abstract. So I wonder what you think about it. All right, final quick comments. Abortion directly kills an innocent person. This was part of the argument. Killing persons is usually wrong. Yes, although some would say, well, abortions aren't really intentionally killing somebody. The intention is something else. This is appealing to like the doctrine of double effect and things like that. I'm not a big fan of that. Killing persons is usually wrong. Yes. However, there are some exceptions. And in particular, people who appeal strongly to sort of the idea of bodily rights would want to talk about this more. You know, if somebody is using something that they don't have a right to, and the only way I can stop them from doing that is doing something that will result in their death, maybe that could be okay. So they would argue. All right. So in sum, I think psychological theories of personhood sort of more simply explain the cases, including end-of-life cases, and yeah, because it seems like the person is gone. These sort of theories do not sort of dismiss with prejudice the idea that some animals might be persons or person-like. And I think these theories are better because they don't tie personhood to a form of sophisticated rationality, and so sort of see being a rational being as the end-all for everybody, and everybody else is personhood is sort of judged in relation to that. All right, that was a lot. And I hope this was helpful. Moving on to the next video.